You'd put in your CRM, but then you go, okay, well, I'm looking at this process. Of this process, this is the biggest pain point. Can we automate that piece?
Hi, I'm Khyati Pal, and this is all about CRM. On this episode, we're going to be focusing on recruitment sales, the difference between an ATS and a CRM, data, AI, and automation. From email campaigns to SEO, my favorite topic, all things CRM. We've got Jamie Hart with us, David Connolly, Neil Curry, Stuart Johnson, Mike Whatman. Welcome, Christy.
Would I spend £50 to go to this conversation?
No.
No. And until the answer is yes, then change them.
Exactly.
I know marketing isn't able to be measured. I was like, excuse me? Let me stop you right there.
Yeah.
It's probably one of the most measurable.
Someone described to me once that recruiters spend their place in two zones, the finding zone and the filling zone.
Yes.
And the trick is to spend more time, as much time as possible in the filling zone, because that's where the money is.
3 pieces of advice you would give to anyone starting their journey, currently shopping for, let's just say, maybe even a new CRM.
To find out.
Your CRM can not only streamline your business operations, but really bring to life your revenue operations. What are revenue operations, you ask? Well, sales, marketing, and customer service. On this episode, we're going to be focusing on recruitment sales. What makes for a good sales team, how to motivate individuals, what metrics should be measured and why, and what kind of sales strategy is guaranteed for you to win in your business, and how all of those can come together with the use of a CRM. It is my pleasure to introduce you to our guest for this episode, Mike Whatman from Mike Whatman Consulting. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. Now, you've coached a ton of teams, assisted and helped a lot of businesses in really defining their sales strategy, whether it be broad level or down to sort of team level. What are your 5 top metrics that should absolutely be measured in a sales environment, and why?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I'm going to kick this episode off by being really on the fence and say, well, it kind of depends what you're looking to measure. But I'm going to go into more detail why I say that. So top 5 metrics, top 5 measurables. The first thing to get really clear on is how do we make these measurables matter and how we kind of communicate that to our teams. From a leadership standpoint, obviously having the right data helps you more accurate with forecasting and you can kind of make more informed business decisions. But that's what matters to the leader of the business or the leader of the team. The people doing the job on a daily basis, their frame of reference is different. How do we kind of make it matter? So I think the first thing to kind of contextualize that answer, it's really how do we make those measurables come to life? And ultimately there's 3 levels to measurables. Within describing this, I'll be able to answer the 5. The way that I think about it is kind of like a pyramid. So a triangle-shaped pyramid, of which there are 3 levels. The top of the pyramid is the single measure that determines business performance for you. So that's called your North Star metric. If you had to pick one measure that determines at the end of the year or period whether you had a smile on your face or not, what would that measure be? For lots of recruitment businesses specifically, that could be annual billings, that could be quarterly billings, or if you're more kind of contract centric, that could be weekly GP. But a single measure of what everything that you're doing is working towards. Some businesses, that could be NPS, it could be something different, but it's about having real clarity from a leadership directive. What is that single measure that is almost our barometer of where we're at? And that's the North Star metric. So like I said, that might differ, but it's that single definition of what good looks like for us as a business. So that'll be the top of the pyramid. The second layer below are what are called your key performance drivers. So these are almost like your precursors to success. So as an example, this could be something like a minimum pipeline value that we need to hold at any one time. Because if we look at the data and we know that we convert 50% of our pipeline and our target, our North Star metric is £100,000. If we convert 50% of our pipeline, then if our pipeline never drops below 200, then based on a very good educated guess, we're going to hit our target. So key performance drivers, that second layer below, can be things like I said, a minimum pipeline value, a minimum number of processes per head that we're working on, first interview conversion, NPS score. So that secondary level of metric are really your best indicators that you're going to achieve your North Star metric.
Yeah.
And then the bottom layer, the third layer of that pyramid, are your key performance activities. So what are the daily tasks that then influence
The drivers.
the drivers? So that could be things like, I call them influencer influencer. So like influencer conversations, so decision makers within a business, or in-person meetings, our CV to interview ratio, or something around number of new customers mapped out in terms of data points, and kind of creating like a multi-threading approach to how we're kind of breaking into new customers or developing existing ones. So I think what that does by creating that clear visual of that kind of pyramid with the different layers is it means that the metrics then kind of flow into each other in almost like a reverse funnel type scenario, because then everything you're doing is communicating towards that overall objective, right? So to loop the answer back around, 5 key things to look at. The first one is, what's our measure of success? What is our single measure that determines whether we're doing well or we're not doing well? And everything that we're doing from a strategy standpoint needs to be funneling towards that. So that's the first thing to have a measure on. The next 2 will be your key performance drivers. So what are your measurables that are your precursors to success? Like I said, it could be pipeline value. Or for example, if you work in the US market, a really good performance driver is your average time to hire.
Yes,
if you're competing against US heritage businesses, often they're incredibly thorough, and actually your time to hire can be your differentiator. So if your time to hire is lower than the average, it gives you a really good predictor.
Quickly you're going to go.
You're going to be successful. So it's 2 in there.
Yes.
And then your 3 daily activities that influence those things. So I think influencer conversations. So the word influencer will get like a weird blue tick association. So what I mean by that is, an influencer. People that sell car perfume or what have you. No, what I mean is people who have influence within a business.
Yes.
And I think the reason why I use that phrase is because client and candidate as labels can sometimes blur the value that can be generated.
True.
I can't speak to a candidate about BD, business stuff. That's what I talk to clients about.
Yeah.
And you kind of lose your influence.
But sometimes in a contractor market, your client can be a candidate and your candidate can be a client.
100%.
It's like a bit of a revolving door there.
Exactly that. And that's why I think it's by just using the phrase like an influencer or a decision maker, it gets rid of those labels. And actually we see those conversations based on the value they can create rather than the label we give them, which almost is like an inclusion and an exclusion criteria of whether we call them and talk to them or not.
Exactly.
Breaking those measurables down into those 3 levels makes everything matter, but it also makes it really, really clear for your people who are doing the job to see why they're doing it.
Exactly. That's so important.
Just doing the numbers, it loses its importance and people become numb to it very quickly.
So then as a business leader and even as a team leader, depending on manager, wherever you're at, how important is it for you to have that accurate information available to you at a glance? How often should they be visiting that information? Is it something that they look at on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, or is it a quarterly thing? Because obviously you don't want to like overdo it. You don't want to be stressing about it on a daily basis just because you've got the information, say in your CRMs. Let's say you're measuring all of that information using dashboards in your CRM and driving that sales performance. You're not going to be scrutinizing every activity on a daily basis.
Exactly.
How often do you recommend team leaders, managers, business owners from a business intelligence perspective, obviously using your North Stars, your anchor, your guide, revisit that, qualify that, quantify that?
It's a good question. And to go back to the first part of the question, why is it so important? I think any leader watching or listening to this have probably tried to carve out time and are listening to this to the expense of doing something else because of how kind of busy they are.
Matters.
As soon as you become a leader of a business, a leader of a team, it's almost like a rite of passage that all of a sudden you just become really busy. Whether it's true or not, or a narrative or a kind of preconception, all of a sudden we feel like we're spinning lots of plates, and like that cognitive load that puts on people to constantly have to make decisions that'll do.
Yes.
The amount of those decisions that we can remove the that'll do gut element and actually use objectivity to it is so important, because whenever people make a decision, they're influenced by their experience, their bias and their emotional state at that time.
Absolutely.
And as we know, especially in a tough market or kind of different market challenges, or also managing people are challenging in its simplest form. Our bias might be skewed, and those biases end up solving the problem that's in front of us rather than solving the actual problem. And we go to this fixer mentality that's probably created the leader's success in the first place in terms of being a biller and being a doer. And then they go, right, well, that's the loudest thing shouting at me. Let's fix that. But that's not the problem. Yeah, that's the effect. Whereas if we actually have the data in front of us, it can, to an extent, remove the bias and show you the cause. Because then where you're choosing to spend your time is on fixing the cause rather than using that time to fix the effect. So the first part to that question is you've got enough going on. Let's allow other resources to help us make decisions, and the data is one of them. In terms of how regularly, I think, and a lot of CRMs, and I appreciate there's lots of different ones, but for me, I think the ones that are really helpful are the ones that have the best dashboards in terms of that don't kind of swamp you in numbers. Guidance, and it's like, right, here's how many people called Sarah they called yesterday. It's like, why are we measuring that? But actually, it's how can we either work with them or kind of whether you're curating your own, is what are the numbers that we need to see? And it goes back to that first answer, is those key performance activities, those daily tasks, leaders want to have a snapshot of them daily. Those key performance drivers are probably more of a weekly, right? And then it's obviously then you filter it kind of that way. But I think especially in a kind of very fluid industry that recruitment is, especially in like a contract or interim market, if you wait 2 weeks to review activity levels and those levels are low, you're 4 weeks away from seeing a return in them, which means you could completely miss your target this month and probably next month. In a perm market, by the time if you kind of wait for a quarter to review where the team is at, it could take average 8 to 12 weeks to start from scratch, to start creating revenue again. So actually you've waited a quarter and it takes you a quarter to counteract that low level of activity. All of a sudden you're half a year gone. And you see that a lot when people just kind of go, right, new year, let's jump in, let's be the motivator, let's go. And I always kind of think it's the same as like if you go to drive somewhere, or like when I was coming here today, I don't walk out of my house and just think, right, go. Like, well,
aimlessly, just go.
Yeah, just go. Like, well, I needed to have gone right. But if I just went left, right, I'm miles in the countryside. I'm not getting anywhere. I'm not getting anywhere here fast.
Like, Mike, where are you?
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, I don't know. I just went.
And so actually, it's about being smarter. And, people talk about, work smarter, not harder. It's an old kind of cliche. But the human brain needs clarity to be able to be optimized. If I know what I need to do, I do that with more confidence rather than just go where?
Yeah, somewhere.
Right? And then you have all this wasted time or wasted data where it's like, just add managers. And you have like 15 security guards added on the CRM.
Yes.
And your nan added 17 times at different Hotmail, at Gmail, at this. It's like, well, I've added data.
Extra candidates.
Exactly, because there's no point to it. Just add
pointless.
people.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important thing to accept.
Yeah. You know what, coming to like dashboards, because I was just thinking about it, seeing it, whether it's daily or weekly, depending on what is it that you're measuring. And, obviously based on that, you look at it, the frequency is determined. The gamification of like dashboards to create or encourage that competition amongst recruiters. How do you see that playing out? Because I feel like there are some people that are very pro it because, they already perhaps utilize that in some way or another. They might have like a static leaderboard, one of those whiteboard things. Some people I've seen have like screens, with like a manual entry of data. You could easily plug in your CRM dashboard if you've got that sorted. How do you see that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I think this is a wider business case. If my mate runs a recruitment business and they've got it and they go, oh, it's amazing. It looks really good. It looks just like a video game, and they all walk out. I'm going to buy it, or I'm going to invest in it to not miss out, or based on the completely wrong purpose. If I have a culture that is toxic, that is just the really wrong environment for creating a high-performing sales team, where it is so meritocratic that the people at the top of the leaderboard get treated differently to people at the bottom of the leaderboard. And like you said, we have, this year we're going to Mykonos or Ibiza and we've got 10 seats and I've got 40 staff, and it comes to November and I've got 2 seats left, and there's like 10 people vying for those last 2 seats. Are you telling me that I'm going to give this person leads and information at the expense of me going to meet Wayne Lineker and shaking his hand?
That's true.
Of course I'm not.
Yeah.
And it creates this really bad environment where we actually end up having to perform with like one hand tied behind our back.
That is so true, because what a negative. I didn't even think about it like that, in terms of like, the incentive being dangled as a performance enhancer.
And that's what I mean. That's why I think it's a really important cultural decision to make in terms of whether you use this or not. If we've been able to harvest and kind of curate a really good culture where feedback is seen as a vehicle to improve rather than a criticism, where we incentivize team as well as individual, then I think it's great. I think it's brilliant, right? Because it speaks to like a younger generation who are used to like instant review, instant feedback. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of, it's this number, I can kind of see it. It's really obvious. I understand that. But the difference between intent and outcome is the really important part. If my intent is to inspire, but the outcome is that it demotivates and creates toxicity, well, that's what matters, not the intent.
Yeah.
Then you're fighting against that kind of leader ego, which is, I've suggested this is a good idea. It's not working. I'm going to stick with it though, because I'm tied into a 6-month contract and I don't want them to think that I can't make good decisions. I think they are great if you have already created a culture that is incentivized around information sharing. How do we think about being an overarching like talent solution business? So it's not contract versus, I can't stand that.
Yeah, I know.
I was a contract biller, and myself and my permanent equivalent at the time created our success by going as a double.
Yeah.
There was no me versus him. Still really good friends with him, and he's doing really well for himself now. And I think that's really important, because you go into other businesses and it's almost like the dark side, right? Don't talk to them, or don't talk to them. Right, okay, but whatever our logo is, whichever business we're representing, we have a shared objective.
Exactly.
And if internally below that logo we're pulling in separate directions, basic physics tells you an object doesn't move if equal force is pulling in opposite directions.
I think it just goes back to like all my conversations that I have, and I'm sure you have as well. It's almost like, what's the objective, isn't it? Unless and until you've got your strategy defined, everything else will always be just scattered around and like not really serve a purpose. And then it's the equivalent of like management by delegation or abdication. So it's almost like the lack of strategy where you've just invested in things haphazardly. It just creates almost like an ecosystem of its own way of working that is more often than not out of control. And then you don't know where to begin, because it just is so messy. You've just added to it. You've either put like more people, or you've just created like band-aid solutions, and you're like, oh yeah, this will do for now because it solves the problem, to your point, like now, whether or not it solves the actual problem or what's causing it. That actually then brings me to the whole culture thing, but also appraisals. So, you know, in recruitment, again, sales, how much are you billing? Where are the problems? Candidates, you know, what kind of, how many BD, you know, looking at BD, how many calls, how many interviews, how many client meetings, and then looking at your metrics as well. Appraisals are supposed to sort of help you with that. Like obviously look at your performance and then help you with that. What I have experienced and witnessed is more often than not, you go into an appraisal without any objective. It's almost like you've got a sheet of paper with like a template that was set up by HR, I don't know, 10 years ago. And it's supposed to help you to guide, like perhaps, you know, not only an experienced person, but let's just look at like a graduate perhaps that's come into your business. You've got this template from 10 years ago. You don't quite understand it. As a team manager, you're kind of tired of going through this. Nothing gets done with the information on that appraisal. How do you suggest people change that? Like, yes, the culture thing plays a role, and that's, you know, something that will take a while. But what kind of strategies or points would you give recruitment leaders or sales leaders that this is how you should go about your appraisals? Because again, for me, it's like all of that data in dashboards, measuring activity lives on your CRM. And therefore that acts as your agenda. Let's go through this and then tell me exactly what's going on here. But they don't do that. So what's going on? Explain.
So I think if you go back to like its simplest form, look at appraisals as with kind of time as the asset, right? So your asset is time, and every single person within a business has that choice of where they choose to spend that time, right? How do we maximize that asset? And I think in my experience, both, like I said, recruitment, but also outside of recruitment, the most influential leaders really kind of focus on how do I optimize time? So then it's everything is done with intent, everything is done with purpose, nothing is a surprise. So then if you kind of combine those two thoughts together, that time is the asset and impactful, high-performing leaders focus on purpose and intent and a point. Well, if I look at our appraisals as a fixed amount of time, half an hour, 45 minutes or an hour, how do I extract the most amount of point? How do I extract the most amount of value from that time? And I think if that's your frame, that changes how you see it. A lot of people see appraisals as a monthly tick box exercise. Okay, fine. My people can't, you know, leave and say they don't feel invested in or they don't get time with me because I spend half an hour with them every month. Like, well, what else do they want?
Sign my life.
And we kind of, and also because, especially if you start leading teams of like 6, 7, 10, all of a sudden that could take 3, 4, 10 hours of your working month. And then you kind of get a bit repetitive and monotonous and you kind of go through the motions because your brain's shortcuts and heuristics kind of comes into play and goes, I've been here before. I don't have to engage. I can just read through this and just go through it. Right, time's up. Great. On to the next one. Right, who is it? right, okay. And so I think if you frame it as how do I extract as much value from it, it changes how they work. So like you said, if you're using your CRM effectively, the data that you need is there. You don't need to spend the first 15 or 20 minutes getting the person to tell you the data
That's
that you
available.
could have already had available to you.
So pointless, isn't it?
But again, if you look at that, again, pointless. Say, for example, we've got an hour and I spend the first 15 minutes doing that. In any other element of life, would we spend a quarter of our time just wasted?
Yes.
You wouldn't allow it.
Voluntarily.
But we do it all the time.
Yeah.
So actually, it then goes to the point, okay, I've got an hour with Khyati. How do I maximize my time? Okay, well, where is she in her progression? Where is she against where she needs to be? What data have I got access to that I can assess where the rate limiting step is? What's the slowdown in getting her there? Okay, I've now got an hour. Where do I need her to be at the end of that hour? And you then reverse engineer it. So you look at each individual and go, where do I need them to be at the end of this hour, half an hour? And then you talk about the stuff that helps them to get there. And people listening to this thinking, God, that seems a lot of effort. Yeah, but wasted time is more of a wasted effort.
Yeah.
Because it's having no impact.
And also no enjoyment either, isn't it? Like there's no purpose.
Yeah.
And as humans, we do need some kind of purpose, whether we admit it or not. Like there has to be some point to doing something, you know. And if at work, especially where we spend so much of our time, both the person doing the appraisal, but also the person who's being appraised.
Yeah.
It's almost like I just sat in here, had to repeat all the information that you already have access to.
Yeah.
Perhaps repeating myself from the last time I was
Exactly
sat
that.
in this room with you when nothing was done. You haven't given me any kind of pointed feedback, no constructive criticism. We've just literally sat here, ha ha ha.
Yeah.
Great. And then it may seem okay the first couple of times, but as it goes, it's almost like, what is the point? You're not invested in me. I'm not invested in you.
A really good question to ask yourself is, would I spend £50 to go to this conversation?
No.
No. And until the answer is yes, then change them.
Exactly.
Because if you think about the immediate return in which you could generate £50 or $50, depending which market you're working in recruitment, if you had an hour focused on, I don't know, landing and expanding an existing customer or kind of mapping out 2 or 3 businesses that hire who you place, you could create, like if you associated an hourly rate to that task, it could be tens of thousands of hundreds of thousands. So if I'm not going to spend £50 to come to this meeting because there's no upside, well then there's absolutely no point to that meeting. And I think a lot of people are like understand the measure of money in terms of justifying, because that's for a lot of people that's the overarching North Star metric. Well, how about as your North Star metric, you associate money with time? How much money are you generating from that conversation? If the answer is 0, if that person sat at the desk next to you and did nothing for an hour, you'd be the first person to say, what are you doing?
Yes.
Why aren't you doing anything?
Yeah.
Well, they're getting as much value from that sitting there for an hour at the desk doing nothing as they are sitting in a room with you.
Doing nothing.
But because you feel like you're ticking a box, you go, I'm doing something.
It's actually worse. You have to like indulge in like pointless conversations.
Yeah. How was your weekend? Yeah, great.
Let me sit in silence and do
Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
It's actually good for my mental health.
Yeah, exactly.
Then looking at big picture and individual sales targets. So like obviously, you know, going back to your North Star, you've got targets. Once you define your objective, whether it's your 12-month objective, 24-month objective, or your 5-year plan, if you're that way inclined, setting your big picture objective and then having it drilled down to like individual objectives, KPIs. How do you suggest recruitment leaders go about it?
One of my favorite things about the recruitment industry is if you look at the amount of businesses that are like less than 5 years old, like it's most of them.
Yes.
Like it's so many.
Oh, my.
Why I say that's a really good thing is because of novelty, is because of new ideas, because of agility and all those kind of buzzwords. But one of the limitations of that is some of the commercial kind of acumen of leaders in business now, which is, well, I think that someone who's been here for 18 months should be able to do 200 grand, just pick a number. And then we kind of pluck the number and then we use the word should. Now, the word should be banned.
Yes.
Right? Should. What should? Who defined should? Right? Should's ridiculous. So I think someone who's been here for 2 years should be doing 200 grand. Okay, first it's remove should. But 200 grand, what's that? And so I think the first kind of area for development that I see within a lot of business leaders is, well, how much do we need them to make? So if we're looking to go through a bit of a growth period and we need to have kind of funds to be able to reinvest, well, actually, our cash in the bank at the end of each month or period, where does that need to be? And if we've currently got 5 heads billing, well, then how do we associate those two things together? Because there's no point going, right, actually, I want people to hit their targets, and I want them to have a really nice time, and I want them to feel like they're progressing. And so we set everybody, I don't know, a 100 grand target, and we pay them all 35 grand salaries, and we pay them 30% commission, and everyone's really happy. And then they've got no money, and then they are struggling, and then they're having to let people go, and then they're having to just make really bad decisions because their kind of cash flow is so terrible. They're going from month to month hoping that 50-50 placement falls in just to keep the lights on. So the first thing around where you set those targets is actually, what do you need them to be? What's the buffer that where you're at as a business is needed? So if you're in a growth phase, that'll obviously be more. Whereas if you're in a bit of a let's be lean and kind of maximize who we've got, then obviously that can be a little bit less. But start there, and then you can kind of go, right, what do we need our people to do based on that? How much do they cost, right? And what would be our average profitability that we would want to see from a business perspective? And then once we've got that clarity in our mind of what we expect people at different levels to do, it goes back to that point of clarity. I was a contract biller, so I said I was slightly biased. I always think January for perm people must be horrendous because you've worked so hard to get your end of year billings if you do January to December, and you've worked so hard and you've seen your number grow, and you walk back in on like the 3rd of January and you go,
what have I walked into?
Zero again.
Happy New Year.
Whilst your contract team are like strolling in.
Yeah. First quarter as well. It's like before the end of financial year, like, the legal financial year. And it's like, it's coming. I know this is going to come in. Yeah.
And so what that instantly creates is that, oh my gosh, I've got a 200 grand target this year. I'm on 0. I'm so far away. And that creates a sense of panic and uncertainty. And often you'll see like job quality or kind of pipeline conversion be so poor at the start of the year, especially for perm, because it's, oh my goodness, I'm so far away from my target. And I'm kind of acting desperation, and my quality standard goes from can I fill this role to can I work on this role? And the criteria for that is very different. Can I fill it? Can I work on it? Well, I can work on any role.
Yes.
But can I fill any role? No. Yeah. And so I think that's why it's so important for leaders, especially in perm, also contract, but especially in perm, to say, right, if we're targeted to do 200 grand based on the level that you're at, based on our average conversion measurables that we have got access to, because we can look at historic data, but we can also kind of model that against market conditions today. This amount of money is roughly this many placements based on the average fee, which is roughly based on your conversions is this many roles, which is based on this many conversations, which is this. And all of a sudden I come in on the 3rd of January knowing that I need to speak to 2 decision makers and in the next 2 days pick up 2 A-grade jobs. I can do that because I know what I need to do.
Clarity,
200 grand is, oh my gosh, that's miles away. Speak to 2 people and pick up 2 roles. That's far more manageable. And I think that's why it's so important how you reverse engineer that to make, I keep saying January as if everybody starts at the start of the year.
Hey,
but it's
January.
It's just whatever your month one is, you start that month by going, well, I know what I need to do today. And just based, human performance, optimizing how the brain works. If I know what I need to do, if I have clarity and I have control, I'm at my best as any human being, not just me, but any human being. So rather than saying, right, 200 grand, off you go, if you've got access to the data that is accurate, that you can use to actually shape, okay, what does today need to look like on a consistent basis? How can we be good every day? That's a far better place and far easier way to manage people.
It just comes down to putting the effort in, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like putting the effort into your own business and the information that you need and your people, and not in a superfluous way. You should be able to measure it.
Yeah, 100%.
It's not like, oh yeah, maybe it's happening, and I had an idea and I can see something happening, but you don't really know how to measure it, and it's just never going to be improved.
No.
I think I've got like 2 questions. Again, going back to the culture thing, from a sales perspective, the mindset around data, the mindset around business intelligence, the mindset around investing in the right skill set to streamline operations, with data and technology being, a central part of it. So not almost like as an afterthought, but the fact that you kind of go, okay, I've got these people with this skill set and this is going to require these tools, which is your technology, to achieve this. The mindset that I have found, and perhaps it's like what you said before, like, most of the recruitment businesses are like 5 years old, because a lot of ex-big billers go ahead and set up their own shop, which is fine, great. But when they were billing, it was very much sell, sales. That is it. And that's right. You need a tunnel vision because that's your goal. You got to go achieve it. But as soon as you become a business leader and you're now responsible for more than your individual sales, in my experience, that shift does not happen. And I'm sure people will agree with me or hate me for saying this, whatever. But have you experienced that? And when you do see that, how do you guide them out of it? If all you've done and you've been good at it, you know, I think it's very hard to challenge yourself when you're good at it.
Yeah.
Because then you're like, no, I'm good at it. Like, I should know this. And all of a sudden you're in this boat where no, you're not. You may be good at sales, but you're not good at running a business, not because you're incapable, but you've just not experienced it and learned about it. How do you manage that? And how do you challenge that? Because that's something that people will take offense to. And that's why I said people will hate me for it. But they will take offense to if you just say it to them like I said it. So how do you go about it?
So self-awareness is a really important skill in leadership. And I think one of the things where leaders can sometimes fall down on is they work on assumptions because that's easier to form a quick decision and quick opinion. I know, I was a sales leader. You forget that your decision making, your like choice architecture is built on 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years worth of muscle memory. So the way that you form decisions or take action or convert is not the same as somebody who's 6 weeks, 2 months, a year in. And we kind of go, yeah, that's obvious, just do this. And I think it's that ability to kind of slow down and go, well, hang on a minute. Me saying it's obvious is based on my frame of reference. I say this to people and they kind of laugh. I was like, no one in your business comes to the office and purposely tries to annoy you by making the wrong choice.
That's so true.
At that point, they've made what they think is the right decision. The difference between why you don't think it's the right decision is your frame of reference is far greater. And so I think how you kind of overcome that challenge is, look, you are brilliant at X, which is why you've decided to go and do your own thing. Fantastic. But what's got you to today is what you've been great at. What's getting you to tomorrow is a different skill set. And it's that ability to get people to stop and kind of go, all right, hang on a second, what do I need to do next? And I think because of the relatively low barrier to entry to set up a business, people then associate that it's then easy to run a business. It's not. It's horrendous. It's so difficult. Every day is a learning curve.
And motivating yourself.
It's so hard. And actually, it's that ability to stop and go, well, actually, maybe this isn't going to be easy. Maybe I can't just do what I've always done. And then it's getting them to be able to be friends with the data and actually see the value that it really provides, because they're not Rain Man. They can't just go, right, I've got 5 people in my team, this person's doing this. You can't do it.
No.
You're going to have enough decisions to make around, you know, have you done our VAT submission this month? Or have you done this? It's like, why is the fridge empty? Like, I'm going to have so many.
Especially when you're on a smaller scale, when you're still building a team, you're like, I'm responsible for everything, and it's exhausting.
And probably 60-70% of the company revenue, if you just ask that, will be you anyway. So you've still got to do your job.
True. Yeah.
So understanding what are the tools that can make my life easier. And the first one is data. The first one is information, because you go from that, it's kind of like a success bias. And you're exactly right. And you said it in the question. Nobody is harder to change their opinion than somebody who has had success with that opinion. Because like, well, that doesn't make any sense.
Yes.
Why would I change that?
It's confronting, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's almost like, what do you mean? Like, my whole sense of identity is built around these things that have brought me success.
Exactly that. And then it's about helping them kind of create new habits. The way that you create habits is that you get them to see quick wins. So you get them to kind of use a certain MI report or track a certain thing and then spend some time improving it. And then they see a quick reward from it. And then they go, because if I've got someone that just tells me that something's better, I need to see it. I need to own it. I need to understand and control my decision rather than be told my decision. And if I can see that it works, okay, I'm in.
Yes.
And so it's about being able to pick some real key measurables and saying, look, measure that for 2 weeks or test that. If you can improve that, watch that go up. You'll know so much, watch that improve. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, that's really important. It's being able to help them kind of funnel it down. And so I get, especially with kind of younger, as in terms of experience, not age, in terms of more immature leaders, to think about something called that 3D principle. So data, dialogue, decide. That's my decision-making process. So every single decision that I make, don't let it be on gut just yet, because your gut is based on past experience.
Exactly.
And if you're new at this, not your gut's fault. It hasn't got this experience.
Exactly.
And so actually instead it's, okay, what does the data say? Then dialogue, discuss it with someone just to make sure I'm not seeing this data in a biased way. But then whatever you do something, decide.
Yes.
Do something about it.
Yeah, act.
Don't be like, 6 months ago we said that wasn't high enough.
It's like, oh, okay, and
Brilliant.
now what?
Yeah,
Let's go.
Brilliant. So yeah, data, dialogue, decide. 3Ds is a good way for...
That's a really good system. I feel like, on data and gut, I often see this, yes, you can have all the data, but trust your gut. And I'm like, okay, whose gut?
Yeah.
Now you've got 10 people,
Yeah.
right? Everyone comes with their own gut. What if your guts are not aligned?
Yeah.
Whose gut do you then trust? Because
Yeah.
data is objective.
Yeah.
Of course, question it, drill down into it, look at the patterns, look at anomalies. It is objective and you can, point out mistakes and maybe investigate further. But if we just rely on gut, then it just creates, to your point, your gut's based on your opinions and experiences in life, and it is not a complete experience, and you've much to experience.
Yeah.
Your opinions will change, hopefully, for certain things. And then also the clash with your other teammates,
Yeah.
your co-founder. Who's gut? If you're not in alignment, then how do you then make the decision? Because then it
Yeah.
becomes about your ego. Who's
Yeah.
more experienced, creating more of a toxic culture.
Yeah.
Doesn't it?
It's a really interesting part of like leadership development is the type of leader that you want to be and what's best for the business. So when you need a group of people to buy into something, then there's different ways in which you could go about this from a leadership perspective. And one of these words, participative.
Oh,
Yes, first go.
Nice one.
Right, I'm not going to say it again.
Oh my God, no, I'm not going to even attempt.
Rewind it and listen to that word again rather than me saying it again. Participative.
Nice.
Which is when you involve the group to kind of give you ideas or give you opinion, but ultimately you as the leader make the final decision. The other version is consensus group decision making, where the group come to a consensus, and whether you agree with it or not as the leader, you're kind of funneling and shaping, but the group own it. And there's no study or tests to say that one is more likely to be successful than the other. It's about how you as a leader want to create the culture within that team. But you need to think about, like I said, that wider group of people that you trust and where they're coming from. And I think it's around that like constructive contention, which is, okay, I'm going to challenge you only to understand, not because I think you're wrong, but how can we create an environment where either as a group of leaders or a founding team, we can sit in a room across the table with each other and go, okay, but why is that your opinion?
Yes, yeah.
Because you want to unpick their bias, and equally you have to allow them to ask you the same question.
Absolutely. I think it's like that mutual respect and not, it's that ego thing, isn't it? That I don't know everything and therefore I have surrounded myself with people who will make up for my lack of.
Yes.
I would like to see more of that.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it just does not seem the norm. That is, treated as the anomaly, and therefore it is celebrated as well when it does happen. I have to ask one last question.
Yeah.
Because this is about behavior
Yeah.
and CRMs. Adoption continues to be a problem. Now, I have my own opinion on carrot versus stick approach, or, how you need to basically, strategy is obviously one thing, but the design of it, the implementation of it, the whole cycle of utilizing a CRM in your business, and then the ongoing optimization of it. But a lot of it comes down to human behavior. Yeah. What do you think stops people from adopting to the CRM, especially when that information that they're required to put in is being put in somewhere? It is either living in the emails or spreadsheets or like their scribbled notes, their head, there's so many ways and places where it lives, but the CRM.
Yeah.
What kind of human behavior is at play here?
Yeah. This is what I love, right? Without going too geeky, my background
Go
pre-recruitment
geeky.
was, so I went to medical school for a bit, and then did a master's degree in like human performance. So this is where I'll get a bit geeky here. So human behavior is wonderfully complex and simple in the same way. In its simplest form, I won't do something that doesn't benefit me. Simplest form. If I can't see how this benefits me, I will not do it. I will choose to do something else. If I see this as a detraction from me being able to do what I want to do, seek pleasure, gain reward from, then this is an annoyance, this is a hindrance, this is a nag. I will avoid that and do this.
Yes.
You said what's kind of happening from a human behaviour at play here. If there isn't an adoption or usage of something, it's because the users of that thing or technology or CRM in this instance can't see how it benefits them. And it kind of nicely summarizes what we've kind of spoken about already in this, which is, well, how do we make it matter? And is this solving the problem? Can they link this tool to their and kind of achieving their goals? So how do you go about doing this? There's really kind of two key elements to this. The first is education. No one changes behavior unless they are educated and can own their opinion. If you tell someone to do something, that inherent 2-year-old within all of us kind of goes, no, I'm going to say no.
I'm asserting it.
Yeah, exactly. I've got a 4-year-old and an 18-month-old, so I'm well in the midst of that at the moment. We never quite outgrow it though. So if I'm told that something is good or something is something, my first response is I don't have control of that opinion, therefore I reject. Right? Cognitive dissonance. If that goes against what I believe, I reject first because it's safe. And then when I see evidence, I can form my own opinion, then I accept. So we're kind of wired in that way anyway. So the first thing is education. Don't just assume that your people, however bright they are, don't just assume that they can join the dots between high quality data and outcomes. Don't just assume because you can and because you need them to, that everybody can. So the first thing is education. Here's how it benefits you. Here's how it will help you. Here's how we've invested in this to reduce this wastage or this coding error that means that we've missed out on this many placements. These are the amount of candidates that have been placed at clients that we have terms with that are also on our database. Add those fees up, 10s, 15s of millions. What was wrong with it? This. And it's about combining our influence methodology between rational influence, which is objective evidence, and also those softer influences, which is how does it matter to them? So use a bit of actual evidence and how it matters to them. So that's the first stage, which is education. The second stage is accountability.
God, yes.
If we kind of say, right, we've invested X into this new technology platform or this new system, and that's it.
Yeah.
We don't talk about it ever again. And what you then create is that kind of old adage of feedback, which is people will keep going away from what good looks like until they're told otherwise.
Exactly, yeah.
And if we just allow it to get away, right, it's the behavior you ignore is the behavior you accept.
Exactly.
If you allow poor data quality, if you allow people to live off spreadsheets that isn't tracked centrally, then what are you meant to do when that person goes on holiday? If that person is 10% of your revenue, if you're a small business, you're just going to turn off 10% of your revenue because they've got it on a spreadsheet or the back of a pad somewhere.
And spend so much time like finding out when they're gone. It's like, oh, where's that saved and where's that paper? And even then have like really incomplete information. Accountability is like my bugbear. Like I really, again, get frustrated. I'm clearly quite a frustrated person.
You need to relax.
It's the accountability. It's like, you've made all this investment as a business leader into your technology, even your people. Why are you not holding them accountable?
Yeah.
People actually work better when they're held accountable because it's almost like standards that they need to meet.
Yeah.
Of course, you need to not have like unfair standards or, targets that they cannot meet.
Yeah.
But if it's all equal, makes sense, transparent, there's trust, merit-based, then why are they not being held accountable?
I think this is always the funny thing that I find is that people will always look externally to blame.
Yeah.
Right. And I imagine, especially with what you do and what you do with businesses, people say, well, I can't get my guys and girls to do this. And it's like the fault of the guys and girls. Yeah. Rather than we look inwards and go, okay, well, I introduced it. Then what have you done?
Yeah.
Nothing. I introduced it. That was my job.
What
I
else do you
paid
want
the
me to
check.
do?
Yeah. I pay the monthly subscription. Or I paid for it. It's their job to use it. Wrong. It's your job to make sure they understand why it benefits them, and 2, accountability, make sure they keep using it.
Yes.
It's how you embed any change and becomes like a cultural thing. You have to anchor it in the culture, so it has to be salient, it has to be talked about regularly, to the extent that it almost becomes boring.
Yeah, and second nature. It's like that's how we do things.
Exactly that. And it's unless you ingrain it, unless you talk about it, unless you have kind of reasons not to follow, then people are just going to take the easy path.
Absolutely.
So whether it is, like I said, we used to have a thing where if contractors hadn't been spoken to that month, then your commission that month wasn't paid. Sometimes you have to be a bit, no, it matters to you now. Now it matters. Yeah. Make it matter. So what you don't want to have, though, is that you always have to be reactive and make those kind of decisions. And like I said, this is a hindsight thing on me, if I was better at educating people at the start, I wouldn't have had to have been that. Yes. Because then what happens is we associate accountability with micromanagement and being punishment. Not nice. Yeah. That's not what accountability is. Accountability is about maintaining high levels of standards that are going to help us achieve our goal. Like I said, looking back from just on my own assessment, if I was better at educating my teams earlier on, I wouldn't have had to do that and be reactive at the end.
Absolutely.
Starts earlier on.
Okay, well, message of the episode: lead with education, not ego.
Yeah,
there we
you
go. Sums it up
There
nicely.
you go. That's the thumbnail.
Yeah, there you go. Lead with education, no ego. And invest in yourself. Like, I think investment in business is one thing. As a leader, leaders need to invest in themselves as well to unlearn.
Yeah, 100%.
Learn and unlearn, because
Yeah.
there are things that are no longer valid.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mike. Really, really happy to have you here. An absolute pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, bye.